Welcome to From the Coach's Office, presented by the Varsity Voices Media Network. On the program today, we have second-year head coach of the Marmion Academy Cadets, Adam Guerra. In Coach Guerra's first year, Marmion won the Red Division of the CCL and qualified for the IHSA state playoffs. Coach Guerra, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. Really excited to be here.
If you are looking to buy or sell a home, contact RE/MAX Realtor and Circle of Legends recipient Christopher Cobb. Let Chris's extensive negotiating experience work to guide you on all of your real estate buying and selling needs. Contact Christopher now to discuss the right strategy for your personalized real estate buying and selling plan. His number is 630-420-0070, or you can visit his website at christophercobb.com. So, Coach, really quick question right out of the gate. How much easier is year two than year one?
You know, that's a great question. In some ways, it's way easier. Like, you at least know where the bathrooms are and where the equipment's being stored. But in another sense, I think expectations are raised, and so it becomes harder in that way. So I think from a logistical standpoint, yeah, it's way easier. Obviously, the relationships with the kids and the coaches in the school. But, conversely, I think that, we achieved some good goals last year, and now we're focused on trying to achieve more.
So you mentioned expectations, Coach, and I wanted to ask you about that. Last year, congratulations on a really good first season, Red Division champs, as Dan said, making the playoffs. What has that done for you and your program as far as raising the expectations for this year?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, now it's about, we made the playoffs. Now it's about winning playoff games. I mean, I think that's where the expectations are. The boys have put in a great offseason of work for that. Summer's been good. And so that's our goal now. It's not just, to play that one playoff game, but to be winning playoff games and playing late into November.
Coach, I feel like when teams are in the process of building and you're in your second year of the program, there's some steps that are recognizable. One of those steps is that when you look at the record, you tend to see, okay, you beat the teams you feel like you were supposed to beat, and you may have games on your record that you didn't win, and they were, again, you probably were the underdog. But what does it take to kind of take that next step and beat one of those teams, maybe make a signature victory? And how hard is it, and what does it take to do that?
That's a great question. So I think number one is just getting every player to be at their best potential. Now talent-wise, a D1 kid's a D1 kid and a D3 kid is a D3 kid. But if you have, your D3 kids playing at the highest D3 level, and then you've got your high school kids playing at the highest level. And so I think that's the biggest step to making that, to pulling off some of those, like you said, signature wins. I think that's step one. So that's, off season conditioning, and honestly, the kids just having confidence in themselves. They've put the work in. Maybe they had to play varsity young as a sophomore, and now they're a junior, and they get to be they're an experienced junior as opposed to a first year junior or sophomore. So I think that's a big piece. I think also it's on the coaches in terms of building a playbook, an offense and a defense that fits what we have better. Year one, you're still you trot out, and I love the week zero scrimmage that the IHSA allows us to have. That's a huge piece. I'm a big fan of that. But still, the way that first game, you never know. And so now you've seen more of your kids, and even the younger guys, you've seen them play those lower level games, and so you have a better idea of what kids are capable of. And so it's on the coaches to make sure we're putting them in the best position to succeed.
So the competition in the Chicago Catholic League, as you know, is fierce on the field and in the games. But I also think there's competition off the field as well, as far as the kids who come into your program and making your program attractive to some of the kids, because they do have choices as far as where they're going to go. So what sets Marmion apart from some of the other programs in the Chicago Catholic League?
First of all, I think school size is huge. We're 450 boys, so we're a small school that creates intimacy, that creates connection. It's very hard to fall behind or fall to the side at Marmion. That's a huge part of it. We have a tremendous academic program. I'm lucky enough to teach AP World History, so I have some of the smartest kids in the school in my class, and I have football players in that class. And that's, I think, a really unique experience of, you have a kid who is fighting to be the valedictorian and is in the band, and he sits right next to a two-sport athlete who is one of the best athletes in the school, and they're both, talking about AP World and like what that experience brings. And I think that Marmion has that more than most schools. So if you are looking for that well-rounded experience, Marmion is really hard to beat when you get that. All the Catholic League schools are good. They're good schools. They're good football. They're good. They're good at a lot of things. But what Marmion separates is we've got that ability to be a well-rounded young man early and often. And then, I think a lot of schools do a good job with the brotherhood. I mean, obviously, you get, you're very partial to your brotherhood and to what you have, but that Marmion brotherhood is also something that's very real.
Coach, one aspect of that, kind of building on that, and we've talked a lot on the podcast about this during the off season, and that's the increase in transfers in high school. And one of my contentions is that the head coach now has to almost add this to their plate. And I know it's not a transfer when it comes for football only, in theory, or athletics only. But is that something, you've had high profile transfers in and out, and I can remember last year at this time being really surprised when you had a transfer out. Now it's so common. How much do you have to manage that, whether it's almost like managing your current roster, making sure they're happy, making sure, or if people show interest in transferring into the school, managing that too. Has that become like part of one of these aspects that you've got to deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So I actually, my coaching career started in California, and California in terms of transfer stuff is maybe 20 years ahead of where Illinois is in a bad way. I used to say like every vacation you'd come home from, any Christmas break, Easter break, summer break, you'd have a kid you never knew was going to leave, would just not show up to the first practice. And you're like, you're calling him, you're calling his dad. Oh, the fit was better over here. So, so I probably showed up with more experience than I would have ever wanted having to deal with that. But yeah, you're right. It's a year round. I mean, you used to say it's a year-round job in the sense of like off-season training, but now it's a year-round job, not just in off-season training, but in off-season recruiting. Both, you have to keep your own kids on your roster. Now, at the same token, the school you're at has a big part of that. And when you have great culture, which Marmion does, and then you're building great culture on a team, you also kind of realize like sometimes there's nothing you can do. Like you've laid the table. You've created the best off-season training program. You've got great kids. You've got a great school. You've got great, and then if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. And you can't like stay up at night worried about that because you can only do so much, and parents are going to do what they think is best for their kids. Sometimes you can come down and have a list and why it is and why it's not. But yeah, unfortunately, like managing, you hear about college coaches talking about managing their rosters. I think high school coaches have had to do that. Honestly, I mean, for the last 10 years, we probably had to do that to a degree that college coaches, are seeing now. So it is part of it. But like I said, I think that kind of like how practice creates the wins and losses, culture creates that transfer situation. And if you're building a really good culture and you're at a good school, you don't, either A, like this year, you just don't have it happening. And then B, you also, if it does happen, you sit back and you're like, we did everything the right way. And if the young man decides to leave, then that's, that's their decision and you can't lose sleep over it.
So, Coach, last year you had a successful season. Year one, you brought in your own philosophy and program, and it was successful. Is there anything you look at here in year two where you kind of tweak your philosophy or tweak your program, anything like that? You kind of learned in year one, and now you're like, here we are in year two. I got to make a couple of changes here.
I don't think, I think it's just what we talked about earlier, like what Dan said about building on it. I think, quite honestly, I think if you were to ask my players, like year two's been, tougher. The expectations are higher. My expectations are higher, for attendance, for effort, for, knowledge of the playbook, for, how we practice, how we perform. So I wouldn't say there's any, it is a tweak, but it's a natural progression of building a better program. We're still on the small side, numbers wise, physically, we were lucky. We've got some big, strong kids, and the boys have, they've earned that strength. They've earned that size. They've been working on it. But I don't think there's a tweak per se. And then every school's if you talk to 6 different coaches at any public or private, like every school's got their scheduling quirks. Every school's got their, that you might not know until you live through it. And so you're like, okay, we're going to be better this way. We're going to start practice earlier this day because we know we have to start practice later this day. That kind of stuff that, I don't, that's just adapting to your circumstances and, getting to know your school better than necessarily like a football philosophy tweak.
Coach, you mentioned it just there in that question, and you last year you said you were pleasantly surprised when you came in at the size and strength of the team that you inherited. We saw it on the field. You had some big, strong dudes. What's the strength of this year's team going to be?
We still, we lost some of those big, strong dudes, but luckily some younger guys put in a ton of work to replace those guys. So I think that, they certainly have done the work in the weight room to be there. Now they have to be, I always say we're a football team, not a weightlifting team. So those guys have to translate, whereas maybe some of those other guys were pretty good football players and they needed the extra boost in the weight room to take them to a successful season. I think now we've got those guys who've had a successful weightlifting offseason need to play well and be those football guys. In terms of a strength for this year team specifically, we are returning a lot more skill players. We had a lot of sophomores and a freshman start last year that now are coming back, and they are, they're juniors and a sophomore, but they've got 10 games under their belt and they've got an offseason under their belt. So I think that that's a huge advantage for us this year that we didn't really have. And then year 2, just the playbook, the defense, the offense, just knowing things better, knowing, like immediately when they make a mistake, being like, I know exactly what I did wrong, coach, without me necessarily or any of my assistant coaches having to like point it out or show it on film. It's like, nope, I should have dropped to the curl there. I totally got fooled by number 2 and chased him, my mistake. Or, I can't believe I inside released on that route instead of outside released by that route. So those are the little things that experience that, once the kids are realizing their own mistakes, and the next step is they don't make them. But, we're a step ahead in that direction.
And as you mentioned, you graduated some key players from last year's team. And obviously, I know you're looking forward and you've got some kids who you're expecting to kind of step up this year, not only from a growth standpoint if they played varsity last year, but maybe some new faces as well. Who are some of the key returning players or new faces that we should be on the lookout for this year?
Yeah, so in my senior class, a lot of this is going to be the guys up front returning, our left tackle, Michael Harris, our left guard, Sammy Ramirez. Michael Votis played defense last year. He's moving to offensive line this year. And then same with Sean Culver, played defensive line last year, is moving to offensive line this year. So, those big 4 guys up front, they're seniors. They played a lot of football last year. I'm expecting a lot out of them. Vinny Testa was a junior linebacker for us last year. He's had a tremendous offseason and has looked just outstanding this summer. So I'm expecting big things out of him. And, those are the big seniors. And then those underclassmen we were talking about who played a lot last year, then they played well. But, now the expectation is for them to play bigger. Everyone a lot of people know this name. Roy Magana is he played quarterback last year for us as a freshman, played 4 really, really good games, and now has had an offseason. He's big, strong, athletic. He's got a great arm, just growing into that leadership production role. We're expecting great things out of Roy. Colin McInerney was a 2-way starter for us last year as a sophomore. I think he really had probably one of the best sophomore first varsity football games I've ever been around in 22 years. He showed he belonged right away. He plays kind of a unique wide receiver and outside linebacker. Not a lot of those guys around, and so he's got to continue and he had a great year last year. He's got to have a better year this year. Henry Miller played corner and a little bit of running back for us last year. Now he's going to be our free and our starting running back, and he's got to have a great year. And he's another guy who's put that time in the offseason. And then Ryan Loria was a corner receiver for us that's returning in those 2 spots and has had a great offseason. So, we're experienced, we're older up front, and we're underclassmen, on the skill spots, but all those guys played a lot last year. So now they just have to play at a high level.
Coach, that it sounds like you've got some great experience returning. And, last year you gave us a bit of a scoop when we had our conversation. You told us that you had moved Mateus Nice from center to tight end, which turned out to be a great move as Mateus was named Offensive Player of the Year in the division. what creative moves, if any, do you have for us this year? And in general, do you look for things like you even mentioned it, some position changes and potential in players as they kind of go through the system? Do you kind of put that out there, or do the players come to you, or is it a mix of both about position changes and that?
Yeah, it's usually, me putting it out there. I talked to our freshmen kind of start their actual practices a week ago, and I met with them and I told them, I said, hey boys, like freshman and sophomore football is about getting on the field. Don't worry so much if that's going to be your exact varsity position. You might play wide receiver as a freshman because you're one of the best athletes, but it doesn't mean you're not going to be a tailback or a linebacker in the varsity years, So I think that there's a degree of you just try to make sure they're on the field and playing football as freshmen and sophomores. And then, that junior year, you might be matching up their size, athleticism, speed better. Fortunately, this year, I don't necessarily have like a specific scoop about a big position change like that because I feel like I have everyone kind of in the right spots. I mean, I think, I don't know how much of a scoop it is, but I think, Roy, Henry Miller, and Colin McInerney are going to really do well this year and put up a lot of numbers. And I think that those, they played last year, so I don't think it'll be a surprise maybe to the coaches who saw that, but I think they're going to have those kind of in Roy's sophomore year where it's like, wow, those guys really exploded onto the scene.
So any particular rivalry, Coach, that kind of gets your team and you fired up?
Not having been year one, not knowing Marmion's history, but Montini and Marmion were in the same conference, was it Suburban Catholic League and Suburban Christian, and then joined the CCL together. And, they didn't always play each other because of the division rotations, but for last year and this year, we're on the schedule. And that's a very important game for everybody. And, they're really good right now. Coach Boo does a great job over there. So, I think that that's a good one that, kind of new to the program last year I didn't appreciate, but now I'm like, okay, this is we played there. It was a great environment, great facility. We've obviously upgraded our facility 2 years ago, so I'm hoping for that same sort of environment when they're at us this year.
We date back to the West Suburban Catholic Conference.
Right.
So that's how old we are. We aren't even mentionable anymore, Joe.
Yeah, I know.
How far back it
that's
goes.
going too far back. Yeah.
And maybe Marmion and Montini were in the West Suburban. I kind of lost. I'm a history guy, but I kind of lost track of that one. Somewhere.
Yeah, we can update you on 70s and 80s West Suburban Catholic Conference. Yeah, when you need it. Coach, I know a few Marmion alums, and the pride in the program and in the school is as strong as any in the entire league. How important is that, your alumni base, to your program?
It's huge. I mean, and it comes in a lot of ways. I mean, having coaches who are alumni on staff. I've got several, both older, and younger. That's huge. I think a big, sometimes you get kind of caught up maybe in like this college model of like donations and things like that. But I think where it's big is when they start having kids that it's, Marmion is the school they're going to, or if they've got girls, or whatever, they're just supporting Marmion and they create that culture so that, when you're at when my son's youth team is playing and I'm there, oh, hey, you're the new Marmion coach. I went to Marmion. This is my, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, they're going to Marmion, and that's just great environment. I think that's probably the most important piece where you get that alumni. And that then those dads and are the kind of a nexus for maybe a group of other dads who don't have an allegiance anywhere, but they're like, man, Dan really loves Marmion. I don't, I'm from Iowa, so I don't know anything about here, but since he loves the school so much, I want my son to be a part of that. So I think that's probably the biggest piece of it. And then obviously, the support for the school is tremendous.
So Dan and I have talked about creating T-shirts, merchandise, Coach. And, one of the things we've done throughout last year, and we started talking about it this year too, is, if you were to create a T-shirt and on the front of it was just a hashtag and then something about the football program at Marmion, what would that be?
For this year's team, it would definitely be a hashtag invest the time. One of my big sayings is don't spend the time, invest the time. And part of that is, I think, Marmion guys do a lot. I have a ton of 2-sport athletes. I have some 3-sport athletes. Like, as I mentioned, I have a lot of kids that are in AP classes that that are in leadership roles in the school community. And so I'm always like, hey, when we're in here, I'm going to respect your time. We're not going to, we're not going to lift 5 days a week in the off season. We're not going to, spend all summer, but when we're here, we're going to invest the time. We're not going to spend the time. So I definitely, for this, this year's team, it's invest the time.
Awesome.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's really good, Joe. Did you write it down?
I did. I've got it written down. Yeah.
And we have it recorded. So
Yeah.
Coach, you mentioned the how much you enjoyed the preseason game last year, and I was actually at that game. Are you doing it again this year?
Yeah, we're at Bennett this year. Coach New's awesome. It's a great matchup. We're close to each other, so the travel's not a problem. We're doing it again. I think it was good. I mean, it's just, especially when you can do it against a quality program that the coaches and the players kind of similar, guys, and we're not gonna. You don't have to worry about anybody getting hit or cheap shotted. So it's really good. And I'm really glad that we're going to do that again.
So last year, Coach, I asked you the question in our interview, if we were talking again next year and we were doing this same type of interview, what would you hope that we were talking about in regards to Marmion football? And let me play you just a little clip of what your answer was there. It's under a minute.
So a year from now, if we're sitting down again for another interview, what do you hope we're talking about 1 year from now as far as your program and what's happened over the last year?
Oh, that's a great one. I hope we're talking about a long playoff run. I think that's within our grasp, and we've got to go out and take it. It's certainly not going to be handed to us, but I do think that's within this team's ability, and I'm excited for that. I also hope we're talking about a great run by our freshman team, and the programs. We're on the upswing right now, and I hope that next year it's even more exciting for if we can top what we did in this first year that I'm the head coach.
Yeah, so really good answer, Coach, and kind of foretelling as well. I mean, you made it to the playoffs, and now you've talked about building on that this year. One question I do have, I actually have two questions about that. First of all, how did the freshman team do last year for you?
Freshman team, lost a lot of close games, so there's a lot of inexperience on there. They were only they were 1-8, but there was, like I said, a lot of close games in there, and there was it was a freshman only team. And we played a lot of Frosh soft teams, so there was an experience gap that right. That I feel was tough for them, but also made them better for this year. And then let's not forget that one of the best freshmen in the class was on varsity, the quarterback.
Right.
So I think anybody knows you put a good quarterback on a team, and that is worth several wins. So I was very pleased with their progress. I can say that in the offseason, they had a great offseason, tons of guys in the weight room, and, they're looking forward to having a really good sophomore season.
Yeah, that's good. And if I were to ask you that same question now for this year, we're interviewing you next year. What do you hope we're talking about regarding Marmion football next year at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be close to what I said last year, but a deep playoff run, a good lower level season. And then, knowing the kids better, I hope that a lot of those guys that I individually mentioned have the seasons that I expect them to have.
Coach, I just have one more question for you. So I want to thank you for your time. But now that you're in year 2, I won't ask you about the Christmas tree farm again. So I imagine but I do want to know, and I don't live that far, but so maybe I've been to some of these places, but where is the best place to get a quick meal before or after a game in and around Marmion?
Yeah, Pub 56 is right down on Farnsworth. That's a really good spot.
Yep, I have been there.
Yeah. So I mean, I think also just because they're pretty big, so you can get in and get you're going to get your meal right away, as opposed to sometimes if you get caught in time. So that's kind of the go-to for us around here. So I definitely hope I should make sure they see this plug for them, and they get a little sponsorship towards Marmion football here.
Excellent. Coach, we really appreciate your time. Good luck on this year's season. We talked a little bit before. You're tremendously busy. I don't know how you do it all, but we appreciate you coming on the Varsity Voices.
Absolutely, Dan and Joe. Thanks for hosting this. It's great. It's so fun to not only get to be interviewed, but also to hear the other coaches. And so many of us are kind of going through the same thing, and we know that, but it's fun to hear another coach talk about it a little bit, and that helps make the drive home a little easier. So I really appreciate everything you guys do supporting the Catholic League.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this week from the Coach's Office, brought to you by the Varsity Voices Media Network. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe, and tell a friend. We appreciate you listening, and we will talk to you soon.